We're ready to get going here. First of all, I'm modeling this T-shirt, and T-shirt is available in 3 sizes. Please help yourself to a LingQ T-shirt. Okay, right down to small. Okay. So today I've just finished a presentation specific to LingQ, how I use it, some of the functionality. People had certain questions. Every time he walks down there, I think my mic isn't functioning or something. No, it's okay. Okay. So, but now I want to talk about, because, okay, in my career, I really got very interested in learning languages about 13 years ago. Prior to that, I was in the lumber business, but even in the course of my professional career, I had reason to learn languages. But I never became quite the nutcase that I've become in the last 13 years. And certainly in terms of the family, right? They all think I'm a nut, but and I've learned a bunch of stuff about learning languages, and I've also discovered things, and I've also seen the evolution of technology and even of attitudes, and I'm increasingly convinced that we are entering an age where being a polyglot can become the norm. It certainly can become much easier than it has been in the past. And I mean, I think in English, for most English speakers, the word linguist is a word that people are more familiar with than the word polyglot. We, in the language community, we think everybody knows what a polyglot is. If you just approach people, random people, English speakers, they don't know what the word polyglot is. But they know the word linguist, and they think linguist means someone who speaks many languages, which of course it does. If you open the dictionary, that's the first definition of the word linguist. Not because most people don't know that there is such a thing as linguistics. But leaving that aside, so you know, we are surrounded by language, and if we look at sort of hunter-gatherer societies today, they live in an area where in the next valley, you know, a little further down the road, people speak a different language. Even today on New Guinea or in the Amazon jungle, and I wasn't there 20,000 years ago. But I can assume that that was the situation then, that there were always lots of languages, and people had to communicate with other people, so they learned each other's languages, and they were probably polyglots. And I had a taxi driver in Vancouver who was from Ethiopia, and he was explaining to me the different languages in Ethiopia and how they just all speak them. And it's no big deal. If you live in Singapore, it's no big deal. You speak 3 or 4 languages. So I think, you know, being a polyglot is natural, and so I got keen on maps because there was a bunch of sort of activity on Twitter about a lot of people don't know where any country is located, you know, geographically. Pardon?
That's madness.
Well, no, but it's true. I mean, like it's amazing that in the UK, you know, they 75% couldn't find Germany on a map.
Shite.
It's unbelievable, yeah.
Come
And
on, that's not true. I'm in the UK and I can find Germany.
Okay, you're in the 25%.
US.
No. But I'm sure.
Sorry.
I mean, it's all fine and dandy to say the Americans can't find anything on the map. I don't think it'd be very different here or the UK or anywhere else. So, but in the because I'm now into my Persian, Arabic, Turkish. So of course you look at the ancient world, the Persian Empire, and of course there were all kinds of languages there in that day. And in China, for example, we think everybody in China always spoke Chinese. Well, that's not true, because there was a core of the ancient Chinese whatever kingdoms, and they gradually expanded, and therefore at some point they encountered different languages. Now, very often in the course of, call it expansion, imperialism, colonialism, or whatever, certain languages get displaced, and obviously this happened in the West as well with the Roman Empire. Creating new languages like the Romance languages and so forth. And even in the Byzantine Empire, everywhere in these empires, people have lived languages, side by side with a dominant language which everyone had to learn in order to deal with a ruler or whatever, and all the local languages survived, so the Byzantine Empire became a Greek-speaking empire, but of course there were many other languages. Just because they were under a Greek government didn't mean that people stopped speaking their native languages. So we've always had, and because I was learning Russian and Ukrainian, I got interested in Kiev and Rus, and we lose sight of the fact that we think like the world is like Western Europe or North America, But if you are in, you know, even if you're in Ukraine, you're looking across the Black Sea at Constantinople, and of course back 1,000 years ago, Constantinople was a major under the Byzantine Empire, which was a multilingual empire. It was a major economic and political power, and that's why, of course, the Eastern Orthodox Church became dominant in the Slavic-speaking areas. And what's also interesting is that when I like history, so Lithuania was a huge country back in the 14th, 15th century. Most of their inhabitants spoke mixture of, call it Ukrainian, Belarus. They spoke a Slavic language which was called Ruthenian, and there the Lithuanian overlords ended up speaking Ukrainian because or Ruthenian because of the influence of the church, and they were generally better educated than the Lithuanian warlords. So the point is, and then you had the Holy Roman Empire, and of course Charles IV, Charles Bridge in Prague. He spoke 4 or 5 languages. So we've always had polyglots. Again, Persia, they were fighting with the Ottoman Empire, and they've all had different languages within their various empires. Empires have always seen different language groups living side by side, learning the dominant language, but still communicating with their neighbors. Austro-Hungary is another example of a place where many languages were spoken. And I just threw that on there because we tend always to think about learning European languages primarily. I think they are the languages that are studied the most. If you look up a list of the most popular languages, it's typically French and German and Spanish and so forth, although that is starting to change. Around the world, the most widely spoken languages are typically the languages which were imposed on people by conquering empires, whether it be English, Spanish, Arabic, you name it, Turkic, so forth. So that's the reality. So I bring that back to me now. I was born in Sweden. My parents, in fact, were born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire at a time when Czechoslovakia didn't exist. And so they spoke Czech, German, French, English. Then we moved to Sweden. I was born in Sweden and then moved to Canada in 1951 with my family. And again, just to look at how the world has changed, we came on a Norwegian-American line.
Wow.
Steamboat. Not steamboat, but yeah, steamboat. And I remember, because at the age of 5, I arrived in Montreal, actually, and I do not remember transitioning from Swedish to English. And we spoke Swedish at home. My parents always had the position, if we were in Sweden, we speak Swedish. If we were in English-speaking Montreal, that's a whole other issue. In the 50s, Montreal was English and French. Right? It was not mixed like now. It was English and French. So we were in NDG. By the way, est-ce que je dois peut-être présenter un peu en français aussi, ou je reste en anglais? En français, voilà. Bon, je vais continuer. Donc, moi, j'arrive ici à l'âge de 5 ans. We lost somebody? Okay.
Plus lentement.
Voilà, okay. Tant pis. Anyway. Bueno, vamos en espagnol también, non. OK, non, en français, non. Non, faut pas exagérer, là. Je dirais 2 mots dans une langue, 2 mots dans une autre. Donc, mais je me rappelle, donc, ma transition de quelqu'un qui parlait donc le suédois, et jusqu'à pour me transformer en une personne qui parle l'anglais, j'ai pas de souvenir de cette transition. J'avais des amis à Montréal, on parlait anglais, on jouait au football, etc. Eh bien, sur le bateau, je me rappelle que ma mère voulait m'enseigner l'anglais. Ben, elle avait un bouquin et elle me montrait des photos, enfin des dessins de toutes sortes de choses. La seule chose dont je me souviens, c'est le mot pétunia. La seule chose. Et tout ce qu'elle a fait, ça n'a pas servi ni à quoi que ce soit. Parce que après que j'avais rencontré des amis, on a joué ensemble, et puis tout d'un coup, je parle anglais. C'est tout. Anyway. Oui, et puis tout mon apprentissage du français à l'école à Montréal, donc Montréal en principe bilingue, mais en fait anglophone et francophone, je ne me souviens de quoi que ce soit, pas de quoi que ce soit, des classes, sauf que à l'époque, il y avait 16 verbes comment dirais-je, le verbe auxiliaire était le verbe être. Il y avait 16, mais maintenant c'est 17. La langue française a évolué. parce qu'ils ont mis « je suis né ». Ben, avant, il n'y avait que monter, descendre, aller, retourner, etc. Je me rappelle à l'école. Et maintenant, ils ont ajouté le mot « naître ». Donc, il y a 17. Mais là, c'est la seule chose dont je me rappelle. Donc, et je me rappelle aussi qu'à l'âge de 15 ans, si jamais, par hasard, on était obligé de parler français à Montréal, ça arrivait, on n'avait que des mots. On n'avait pas de structure grammaticale, bien que c'est la seule chose qu'ils enseignaient à l'école. Moi, vouloir, voulez, on n'avait pas de structure. Et chaque année, on avait des tests, on avait des bonnes notes, et puis on n'était pas capable de parler. C'est la réalité. Puis, puisque c'est les années 50, je me rappelle, il y avait the riots when Maurice Richard was suspended. I don't know how many of you remember, but in the 50s, Maurice Richard punched a referee, okay? And he was suspended, and he was suspended right, including the playoffs, and the good people of Montreal thought this was unfair, and there were riots at the Forum and stuff like that. Anyway, so I put Maurice Richard. So he is in class there saying... Anyway, so my thing is, the way we teach languages at school, with all due respect to very good teachers, has often not been very effective. Yep. Part of it is motivation, of course, because that's a big part of language learning. And part of it, I believe, it's unfortunate that we focus so much attention on teaching one language. In the case of English Canada, it's French. In the case of much of the world, it's English. And then we have people like this gentleman who works for the British Council, who says, quote, "The lack of qualified English language instructors presents one of the largest challenges to educators and citizens across the globe." I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to say. I would say the fact that people aren't motivated to learn languages, they're often discouraged from learning languages by the classroom, there's far too much focus on learning just one language, that's a problem. But the lack of qualified English language, when I came to Montreal, I didn't need a qualified English language instructor. Now, granted, I was young. I was 5. I had friends. So you can't compare. And I had no inhibitions. And I didn't mind sounding like a 5-year-old. Adults don't like to sound like a 5-year-old. So there are differences. And because there are lots of languages out there. And because I showed the languages of Europe, obviously in Asia, wherever, we are surrounded by lots of languages. And every time we learn a language, we learn about the culture, we learn about the people. Those people become less strange. So my first strange language was Chinese. And in those days, the equivalent of the MP3 player was the open reel tape recorder. Wow. So I was in Hong Kong, and well, yeah. And this was not even a ghetto blaster. This was this was parked in my room, and I had to sit there in Hong Kong, the sweat pouring down my face, listening to Chinese. Then I went to Japan, and now we're into cassette tapes, which very soon go, and then they're all spaghetti, if you remember the cassette tapes, and you can't use them anymore. But in every language, I have found sort of a key source of content which fascinated me. And even if I didn't understand it, I could listen to it. And in the case of Japanese, it was this thing called Showa no Kiroku, which is a history of the Showa era. And it's very, very good. And it includes actual radio broadcasts from the time. And I was in my car, you know, at 36 degrees centigrade, pouring with heat, pouring with sweat. And I'd be listening to this over and over and over again. And so in my early days of learning languages, like even getting into French, because I eventually got interested in French civilization, went to France, studied, j'ai fait mes études en France, études universitaires à Sciences Po. Donc, c'est par le fait que je me suis intéressé à la langue, j'ai beaucoup écouté, beaucoup lu, et c'est comme ça que j'ai appris la langue. C'est pas dans les classes. Et même pour le japonais aussi, j'écoutais beaucoup, je lisais beaucoup, et c'est parce que le cerveau apprend. Le cerveau, c'est une machine pour apprendre, ne peut pas faire autrement que d'apprendre. Et il faut avoir la patience parce que le cerveau apprend lentement, mais le cerveau apprend. Et il faut donner assez de nourriture, assez de stimulus, assez d'expérience au cerveau, et le cerveau va apprendre. Par la suite, on peut regarder des explications pour expliquer des choses dont on a déjà eu l'expérience. Mais si on n'a pas l'expérience, les explications théoriques ne sont pas très utiles, de mon avis. Tout ce que je dis, c'est de mon avis. Ce n'est pas nécessairement l'avis des autres. Enfin. Et donc, j'ai compris que l'apprentissage se fait à travers l'écoute et la lecture. Donc, chez moi, j'ai un tas de CD, en allemand, en suédois, en russe, en tchèque, enfin, beaucoup de langues. Mais tout ça a changé, et c'est pour ça que c'est l'âge d'or des polyglottes qui s'annonce. On a maintenant des moyens qui n'existaient pas avant. Ils n'existaient pas il y a 50 ans quand j'étais à Hong Kong avec mon open reel tape recorder. Il y a des films, il y a Netflix, et je montrais avant là comment avec LingQ par exemple, on a un, je ne sais pas comment ça se dit, un web browser extension qui nous permet d'importer les textes des films sur Netflix et ça devient des leçons. Et l'avantage, c'est que, bon, maintenant j'ai étudié le turc, si j'importe un texte en turc d'un journal, ou même de TED Talks, parce que ça se trouve sur YouTube, et on peut, avec notre browser extension, on peut importer des vidéos de YouTube. Eh bien là, TED Talks, articles d'un journal, etc., il y a 40% de mots que je ne connais pas. Donc c'est très difficile. Même avec LingQ, cherchant chaque mot, sauvegardant les mots, blablabla, c'est difficile. Mais les textes des films, les dialogues, c'est beaucoup plus simple. Il y a peut-être 15 à 20% de mots inconnus. Donc c'est beaucoup plus abordable. Parce que le problème, pour moi, à l'apprentissage des langues, c'est le contenu qui est le plus important. Donc, on a chez nous, on a ce qu'on appelle les mini-stories, c'est des petites histoires, point de vue. Donc, je vais au magasin, par la suite, elle veut aller au magasin, donc on change la personne, on change le temps, mais c'est plus ou moins le même vocabulaire, et on a 60 petites histoires comme ça. Et là, c'est 90% de mots de très haute fréquence. Mais la fréquence diminue très vite. Donc, après les 1000 ou 2000, après ça, ça devient plus ou moins des mots à très basse fréquence. C'est ça l'ennui. Et c'est difficile de trouver un contenu qui vous permet d'aller des choses donc faites pour l'apprenant à des choses authentiques. Et là, je trouve que les films, par exemple Netflix, c'est très utile. YouTube, e-books, audiobooks. J'apprenais le polonais, tout de suite je vais chercher s'il y a des audiolivres pour lesquels il y a aussi les livres numériques. Et tout de suite, je trouve, il y a des sites, il faut chercher en polonais, publio.pl, voilà, il y a des livres où il y a donc le livre numérique avec l'audio. J'importe le livre numérique sur LingQ, j'apprends les mots et les expressions, et j'écoute le livre. Ensuite, Google, si j'ai des questions sur des conjugaisons en, je sais pas quoi, en arabe, pas difficile de trouver. On trouve toutes les explications qu'on veut, quand on les veut. Il y a même on a même un link, on est lié avec des dictionnaires de conjugaison. Donc, chaque fois qu'on voit un verbe, on va regarder la conjugaison. On ne va pas pouvoir se rappeler de ce qui est là, mais c'est ce qu'on a dit, it's more exposure. And so, on l'a quand on le veut. Donc, il y a un tas de ressources, de grammaire, de contenu, etc., qu'on n'avait jamais avant. So, it's an ideal time to become a polyglot. So, I feel that the traditional language learner focused on one language, focused on producing the language, worried about making mistakes, stays with sheltered material, never leaves the sheltered material, but realistically needs the language very often in the case of English for a job or for other reasons, and so they feel that they have to stay with this system. You know, on the flight out from Vancouver, I noticed a lady beside me who was learning Italian, and she had this workbook, and she was carefully writing in, you know, all the answers to these drills. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to know what you mean by sheltered material.
Okay, any textbook material, anything that is written for the learner. So we say, okay, the learner only has a vocabulary of X, so we'll have to keep it very simple and we'll only use a limited vocabulary. So this lady is doing these exercises in her workbook. Oh, I said, here's another person who learns languages on the airplane, like me. Good. So we had a chat, and she said, but the problem is, I have no time. So I didn't say to her, but I said, if you have no time, why are you spending your time doing exercises? I think those exercises, and every language book has them, I personally find them extremely inefficient ways to learn language. I think you are far better off to be engaged with the language in some way, listening and reading, and racking your brain to try to get the right answer to a question with always the fear that you're going to get it wrong. And then when in fact you do get it wrong, or you can't remember, all of that builds up negativity. The good thing about when I listen, I don't understand. I understand it wrong. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I feel that this so-called passive learning based on listening and reading is actually not so passive, because you are engaging the brain. You're giving the brain a lot of experience with the language. If you're curious about something, about a structure, you can look it up. And so I think the traditional language learner is too much. There's too many negative signals being sent to the traditional language learner, whereas I believe we can progress to like the age of the polyglot. I think that, and I know very good teachers who teach 2 or 3 languages, by the way, so that typically if kids say, well, why do I have to learn French? I'd like to learn Spanish or Chinese. Then the school board would typically say, well, we don't have an accredited teacher for that language, so therefore we can't offer that language. That shouldn't matter. That shouldn't matter. If you have a teacher who is trained in language learning, who has access to resources through her colleagues, through a network of connections, she can find, I want to learn Turkish. She will go and find material for Turkish, and she will encourage you, and she will follow your activities and help you. And therefore, I see no reason why a kid in school couldn't be exposed to 2 languages in 1 year. And
you need a really confident teacher to do that.
Well,
that's the...
Yeah, but you have to have that accepted as a discipline.
Yes.
That a language coach
Yes.
is someone who is, you have to be confident in teaching one language.
Yes.
You can't go in there and say, I don't really know French, but I'm going to teach it. That's not going to work too well.
That's right. In English school systems, it's so restricted, they don't have space to explore. Do you know what I mean? Because they have to meet these targets and guidelines. This is lovely, but it's not.
Yeah, I mean, sure.
Sorry.
There's always a reason why
Yeah.
not to do something.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that tomorrow everybody start doing it, but I'm saying that in an age when there are so many resources available, so much interesting material. I only touched on the Netflix and the YouTube and the, whatever, you name it, sports. I mean, kids like to follow, Barcelona or whatever it might be. There's so much stuff out there. Cooking, if people who are interested in food. And I'm interested in, let's say, language X. So rather than totally focusing on having, it's nice that the teacher is very competent in, say, Spanish, but actually it's not necessary. It's not necessary because you can find native speakers of Spanish online to listen to, okay? Now, however good that non-native speaker is, probably she won't be better at speaking the language. If you're just listening and reading, you can get that content. If you want to talk to someone, you can talk to someone online. You can look up the grammar. You can get the... Now, there you need the teacher to help the student find those things and explain, because the kid, first of all, to motivate the kid to do it, and then second of all, to help them along. But if that were a discipline, I don't think the limit is that the kids wouldn't be able to handle it. Okay? So, and I think in the age of the polyglot, we explore languages for our own reasons. We find other people who are doing the same, like the group of us here, exploring languages. We learn that perfection is not the goal. And so I have always said you should focus on one language at a time, and then recently I decided I would go for 3. Just to see what it's like. Well, I do that. The reason I started learning Russian at the age of 60, 13 years ago, is because I said you shouldn't focus on grammar, and then people said, yeah, but Russian, you can't do that for Russian. That might work for Japanese, but in Russian, the grammar is so complicated. Yeah, it's complicated, but the process was the same. It's still a lot of listening and reading. The brain starts to get used to how the language works, and then when you're curious, you look things up and forget what you looked up. So that's the process. You go back there time and time and time again. You see the same table. You see the same explanation. And eventually it starts to click. And that's what's so wrong. Teacher teaches, okay, we're going to teach you, whatever, the subjunctive. Now I'm going to test you on it. Like, not a chance if it's just been taught. Not a chance. 6 months later, maybe. But, now doing 3 languages, and of course I'm 3 months on one, 3 months on the other. So I was actually not bad in Arabic for a while. And now I go to the Mundolingo. By the way, that's why my voice is a bit hoarse. Have anyone here been to Mundolingo? So they gather in this pub. They're boom, boom, music is pounding, and everybody is shouting at the top of their lungs. And after an hour or so in there, even without people smoking, you lose your voice. Okay? But there I speak Arabic or Farsi. And I studied them each for like a period of time, longer for Arabic, 3 months for Farsi. And I did a video speaking the language, and I was very proud. Yeah? Well, you're a lot better than I am, I'm sure. But I did my video in Farsi. You can look it up on my YouTube thing. And around Vancouver, I chat up the sales staff because there's a lot of Iranians in Vancouver. And there's a girl there who speaks Farsi. I couldn't say a thing. So you accept the fact. And the same happened to me. I was actually quite good in Ukrainian. I had listened to audiobooks about Ukrainian history and read on Ukrainian history, and I was doing fine in Ukrainian until they had a polyglot gathering in Bratislava. So I said, I'm going to learn Slovak. So I just totally force-feed myself Slovak. I arrive, and there's a Ukrainian guy there. I couldn't say a word. Toast. Couldn't say a word. A week later, I was in Lviv, Ukraine. It all came back. So when we learn multiple languages, we have to accept the fact that you can't just turn it on and you're going to forget stuff. You're not going to be able to say stuff, and it doesn't matter. So with the sort of, you communicate, like if you're speaking Romance languages and you're throwing Italian in with the Portuguese and whatever, trying to speak Spanish, it really doesn't matter. And the more you stay in that one language, you will eventually clear out the stuff that doesn't belong. But you're still able to communicate. And I think that sort of spirit of enjoying languages, enjoying getting to know. Now, having learned some Arabic, Arabs are less strange to me, or Turks, or Persians, less remote, less exotic. I've been through some material in Arabic, heard them talk about themselves, and so even the little bit that I've learned, it's helping to get to know other people and other cultures. So it's good. And the fact that I can't perform, someone comes in and starts speaking to me in Arabic and, cold sweat forms on my brow, and it doesn't matter. So that to me is the polyglot. The polyglot doesn't have to be someone who's perfect, but it's certainly a legitimate goal to say, I want to really be good in Japanese. Go for it. But also the sense that I want to be able to access 4 or 5 languages to discover more about my humanity, call it. I think that's also a legitimate thing, and I think we're heading to it. We're in an age where that is more accessible than it ever was. So I'll just finish off and then I'll take the questions. So you can't speak them all the time. That's why input is so important. Like I have my mini stories. If I go back in, I've listened to them so many times. I was listening to Arabic. It comes back very quickly. And what's more, because I have been away from Arabic, when I listen to Arabic, I hear it better. This is a very, very interesting phenomenon. If you leave something and you do some other language, you come back to that first language, you hear it more clearly. And our ability to learn does depend on our ability to notice. And if you listen to the extreme example, if I listen to the same story over and over and over and over again, my brain is learning less and less and less. So it's always this issue of you got to have repetition and novelty. And so leaving it for a while, doing another language, coming back to it is fine. Don't worry about, how do you maintain your languages? I don't worry about it. Learn to be a dilettante. And I just threw that, people always say, well, travel to the country or get a girlfriend or a boyfriend. That's not practical. If you're learning 10 languages, you can't have 10 girlfriends or boyfriends. Maybe you can, I don't know. You can't. Pardon?
That's what worked for me.
All right.
Speaking German and then we...
Yeah, it'll work for a couple of them. You can't be learning them at the same time, though. If you have 4 languages on the go, you can't have 4 different. Maybe you can. I don't know. But the same is true with going to the country. It's just not practical to say, oh, I want to learn Turkish. Okay, I'm going off to Turkey. If you don't have enough of a background through a lot of input, you'll go to Turkey and you won't get anything done. So I think it's important to not fuss about how you maintain them, but just to enjoy them. And that's what I have to say. Now I'll take any questions.
I think you have a question of culture as well. For North Americans, you know, why doesn't everybody speak English? If you go to Europe, I had to take 3 foreign languages in school, even though I have to really get back into 2 of them, because though I can read, I can't speak anymore. If you go to Southeast Asia, the average person has already 3 or 4 languages. I mean, if you take Singapore, they have Tamil, Malay, English, and Mandarin, and they don't even think of it. So it's really getting, you know, culture, getting over some kind of culture barrier that, you know, it does exist and it's possible, and not the entire world wants to speak English.
But then the challenge is, if you live in Vancouver and you say you have to learn French, and the average kid says, what for? You know, really, who am I going to speak to? Whereas, now, having said that, a lot of parents put their kids in French immersion. My grandchildren went through French immersion, and they do end up with a good level of comprehension, not necessarily a tremendous ability to speak, but good level of comprehension. And comprehension is the core. If you have good comprehension, you'll learn to speak. And so maybe the emphasis should be explore languages, rather than saying, you know, Canada is bilingual, therefore you have to learn French. That's not, that really doesn't register with the kid, you know?
I'm even surprised that's still the case in Vancouver, because French is number 7 in the languages.
Across Canada in the school systems, French is a second language, wherever you are. Which is still, I have no argument with that, but why not have 3 instead of just French? That's all. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. So I'm a monolingual Canadian, and whenever people ask me about that, I say it's because the Canadian government failed me. And which I still believe to be true to this day, because after 9 years of French in school, I came out being able to say bonjour and merci. And apparently my accent's pretty good, but I mean, it's only 2 words, so I'm not too happy with that. And my journey has been a little bit different, because I left French in grade 10, and then I left thinking that that was the only way that you could learn languages, and that if I were to learn another language and I couldn't succeed at the method that the Canadian government had taught me, I would never be able to learn another language. In grade 11, I started trying to learn Chinese, and it literally took me 2 years of trying and failing and temporarily giving up and coming back and trying and failing to figure out the input hypothesis, basically through your videos. So now I know I can learn any language, and I believe I could learn French to a much higher degree within, 6 to 9 months. But for most people, especially my friends, who haven't gone through the grueling process of actually figuring out how to learn languages, they actually have no clue on how to get started. So what would your thoughts be on people who aren't like us in this room and still think that the way the Canadian government taught French is the only way to learn languages actually isn't?
It's very difficult. Very difficult. First of all, you have a problem. I was going to think of an example. No. So I was interviewed by the CBC. So I get a phone call from Montreal while I'm in Vancouver, and they have the pre-interview interview. And so the guy asked me a bunch of questions. And he asked me, so how do you learn? So I said, lots of listening and reading and blah, blah, blah. So his answer was, so you just need to go to the country. Like, people don't even listen to what you're saying, right? The idea that, people argue and they think they're going to persuade the other person. First of all, the other person is not going to be persuaded. Probably isn't even listening to what you're saying. So that's a major problem. People have to experience it themselves. I don't know, it's a major issue for LingQ. People come to LingQ, where's lesson 1? We say, well, there maybe isn't a lesson 1. It's not obvious that the language comes in, this is the easiest thing to learn, this is the second easiest, this is the third easiest. It doesn't work that way. But people are conditioned to believe that. I don't know what to do. We think, for example, that Netflix, we're working on making our library and content area more attractive. If you can stimulate people with something that interests them, so that's kind of what's pulling them, then maybe they might follow along. Before you can actually understand the movie, you got to go through the mini stories. So, but this is what you really want. Nobody wants to do these simple, repetitive stories. I happen to like discovering a new language. Most people are not interested in discovering a new language for the sake of discovering a new language. There has to be something there that attracts them. But the other is they're convinced that the way they were taught at school is the only way to learn. I'm no good at learning languages. I hear that all the time. Because I was no good at school, therefore I'm no good at learning languages. And you can, oh, well, yeah, but you should try LingQ. Not very persuasive, no. So I don't know the answer to that. except that maybe if you can make it attractive to them, you know. I think the biggest teacher of English is the television program Friends. Better than the British Council, this guy who thinks that the tragedy of the world is that there aren't enough certified English teachers. That's not a tragedy. Maybe there's too many certified English teachers. Friends or Cheers or any of those programs are much more influential, and a lot of people in Japan and elsewhere, you know, use those to learn the language. So I don't know the answer to your question. If I did, we would do more of that in terms of persuading people to use LingQ. Yeah.
So completely a different question.
Yeah.
I'm interested in how you think about what I see as, not to use too fancy a term, but a dichotomy between depth and breadth. And so when I hear someone speaks 30 languages, I first say, well, how well can you really speak 30
Right.
languages? And my preference seems to be for depth, but I have this inclination to go wide as well. And I play music, and I tried way too many instruments, and it's similar with language, I think, for me. And is that a false dichotomy for you? And what are your thoughts around it?
You know, one of the problems in today's world, or this probably was always a problem, is there's so much choice. You know, it used to be you went to the store to buy underwear, men's underwear. There was one type of men's underwear, maybe 3 sizes. Now there's just this tremendous selection, right? And in everything that's the case. And now, for example, you know, I'm on my iPad learning whatever language, and it's easy for me to say, let me have a look at Arabic again, even though I'm supposed to be doing Turkish. And so I really have to discipline myself, say, stay on Turkish for 3 months. Or check my Twitter feed. What's happening in the world? What has Trump said again? You know? You know. So you have to make a choice. You have to make a choice. And my intention with the 3 languages that I'm doing is that I'm going to stay with them until I am, call it B2 equivalent. I don't write tests, but like I consider myself B2, close to more or less at B2 in, let's say, 10 languages. So I want to get to B2 in those 3 languages if it takes me 2-3 years. Russian, like I didn't speak Russian for 2 years. I listened for 2 years before I started speaking. And then I spent another 2-3 years, and I was enjoying what I was listening to. And as long as I'm enjoying it, I was listening to, first of all, I would do audiobooks and e-books. I like the 19th century, novels, and then there was this political radio station, Echo Moskvi, and every day I would download these. They had interviews with the text and the audio and stuff, and I just do it. So as long as I'm enjoying the language, I stay with it. When I'm bored with it, I move on. And because I'm retired, I'm not learning for anyone else. I'm only learning for myself. So I kind of do what I please, but I am determined to spend enough time to get sufficiently fluent in those 3 languages, and I've got to try to stay. If I'm on Turkish for 3 months, I got to stay on Turkish. And as to whether you're better, like you got Moses McCormick is on YouTube, and he's got like 60 languages, and he's probably not tremendous in any of them. He's very good in Chinese. And sometimes people criticize him, but that's his choice. And somebody else who just wants to be like total master of Japanese, that's valid as well.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I really like the way you frame out using the word linguist rather than polyglot, not only because one's a little bit easier, but because I also think polyglot puts pressure on people who want to learn another language, that there has to be a big number or a lot of flags on the tags that we're wearing here today, right? But on the flip side of it, I personally think it's fine for somebody to say, I just want to be conversational in a half dozen languages and really good in a couple of others. But one thing that I see a lot of is people say, oh, I speak crappy X. Oh, can we speak some X right now? No, it's too crappy. I'm embarrassed, right? And that kind of, it's like the people who buy the collectible toys and never play with them. They were not designed to sit in these boxes and go up on your shelf. They're designed to be played with and dirtied. So what advice would you give to people who really, they've studied, they want to learn X, and then they come here or somewhere else and they find somebody who speaks X and they just immediately shy away? What advice would you give them to get over that so they can engage?
You know, I think the better your comprehension, the better you can speak. Maybe not right away, but that's kind of like a precondition. If you are the other way around, you can say a few words, how are you, 2 beers please, and that's all you can do, that's not very good. And so for example, you know, I was at this Mondo Lingo, and there was a girl there that spoke Persian. So I said a few things in Persian, and she came back at me. I couldn't understand what she was saying. That's not a good feeling. The Turkish, because I've been doing Turkish more recently, and I've been listening a lot, so I understood what the Turkish person was saying. So comprehension is key. Some people are just going to be inhibited. I'm not inhibited. Okay, I know my Persian is lousy. I still tried, you know, and then I said, sorry, I can't. So whatever. Some people are going to be inhibited, but if we can focus on comprehension, it's pointless to tell people, well, don't worry about it. People are still going to worry. Like, don't worry about how you sound. No one's going to correct you. Just go for it. But if we at least focus on comprehension, people will develop that ability to speak, even if at first it doesn't come out. You just have to focus on comprehension. And I think I personally have found that my mini stories, which we started 2-3 years ago, has enabled me to start speaking much, much sooner than was the case before. Like, I was 2 years listening to Russian before I started speaking. I was 6-7 months on Czech, even though Czech, being a Slavic language, the grammar was much the same, the vocabulary is 50-60% the same. Whereas now, Greek, Persian, I started talking to a tutor after 2 months, and I did fine. Because the mini stories, there's so much repetition of basic structures. First of all, the most common verbs: want, give, come, go, take, need. And, you know, on the other, like, however, because. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And if you listen to it 20 or 30 times, when you go to speak, it starts to come out. So I think those are some of the strategies you can do, you know, take in order to improve your ability to speak. But fundamentally, you have to have a good level of comprehension. And so I'm not a fan of this idea, speak from day one, just, you know, go at it if you don't understand what they're saying. And it's difficult. It's difficult because, and of course, even if you have good comprehension, if you haven't been in the situation before, you will still struggle. I can remember I was in St. Petersburg, and thought my Russian was pretty good. I could carry on conversations. I went to the train station to buy a train ticket. A lady, a rather heavy-set lady, is sitting there selling the tickets. And I asked her, I thought I said, you know, I need a ticket to wherever I was going, Viborg. And she comes at me, I didn't know what she was saying. However, after a while, I figured out what she was saying. If I go there again, I will have already experienced that. So I can now anticipate what she's going to say. And so we need to be able to anticipate what people are going to say sometimes. And so if it's just out of the blue, speak the language, they say something, yeah, you didn't get it. But if you just stay with it, eventually you start to anticipate what they're going to say. And so I think the good comprehension and some previous experience, the ability to anticipate, and then the speaking comes. Yes?
Yes. So,
yep.
am I correct? You said that recently you've been spending more time learning more than one language at the same time.
Correct.
So that's something you didn't used to do.
Right.
Okay. I'm curious in hearing more about your impressions and observations about that experience. Now, I thought I had a very good, very specific question, but now that I've got the mic, it just seems it's gone. But like in my case, for example, right now I'm learning French, and I need to keep doing it. I need to spend a lot of time on it because, you know, I live here and I'm going to need it for work. Now, I'd like to spend time with other languages, but I find that, you know, do you ever come into issues with like motivation, time management, that kind of thing? Like, for example, I would like to learn Japanese again, but the idea of like just spending time on beginner material right now, I just like, oh, I don't want to do that. You know, I want to like listen to real things, but my level's not there yet. So like I got to spend a lot of time on French. I could maybe make a little bit of time for Japanese, but the progress would be slow. Now I'm rambling, but
yeah.
Anyway, I'm just curious what your impressions are after having done it quite a bit recently.
So, you know, I used to say focus on one language, possibly go 80-20. So 80% on your main language, 20% on your minor language. But I decided to try this 3 months on, 3 months off. I don't know how it's going to work out because I don't need the language for anything. So I can be totally, I do whatever I feel like doing. I think if I were in a situation where, okay, I need the job, I need the language. I need, in fact, a very good level in French. If you're going to work in French, you actually need a very good level. Like if you know, B2, C1, whatever you want to call it, requires a very large vocabulary. passive, because you're speaking with native speakers who have very large vocabularies. So the idea that you can just go in, well, if I learn the most common few thousand words, I'll be fine, which is one of the myths, is absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. And I've had that experience many times. I have a very large vocabulary. My statistics tell me I got a large vocabulary. And you're always missing some of those very important but low frequency words. So actually, you need a very large vocabulary to be comfortably functional in the language. So if I were in your shoes, I would focus on French because I need it. And the advantage with French is that you can go at stuff probably that is interesting. So you can be enjoying the language and learning at the same time. And that's what I would do until I got to a point where I was so comfortable. I'm out with whoever, they're talking, I understand, I can do everything. And now, okay, then I can introduce Japanese. That's what I would do. Yep.
My question is, what about absolute beginners and people who have zero exposure to the language, especially for languages that are completely alien to them? For example, for English speakers, Chinese, because I'm teaching Chinese online, I find that most of them, because there are no words that transfer, no false friends, you know. So I'm just wondering, like, how do people actually get started so that they can actually get to a comfortable level where they can do comprehensible input? Because yesterday there was a speaker named, I think, Stephen Carl. He said that there's a golden ratio where for the beginners, you know, there's like a 80% learning and 20% acquisition. And as we progress to like B1, B2, we can do 80% acquisition and just 20% learning. I'm wondering if you agree with that.
You know, I think there's only acquisition.
So what about absolute beginners, though? Like
only acquisition. There's only acquisition. You're acquiring a language. So with, obviously, okay, the languages that I've learned most recently, you know, obviously if you're going from Russian to Czech to Polish to Ukrainian, it's relatively easy. Or if you're going from French to Spanish, whatever, that's easy. English to French is easy. You got 50-60% vocabulary is there. Okay, you may not understand it, but it's there. Now you go to Greek, which I did. That was kind of the first language. Well, obviously, Russian, that was, okay, Russian, but there's still some, like 30-40% of words. From Greek, from Latin, you're going to recognize. Maybe it's less, but it's not as big a jump. Greek was tougher. And, of course, you're dealing with a different script, but the script parallels more or less the alphabet that we're familiar with. It's always difficult to read in another script. Like, even when I didn't know Czech as well as Russian, it was easier for me to read Czech or Polish than to read Russian, because I have spent all my life reading in the Latin alphabet, and so the strange newer alphabet is always more difficult. That never changes, because I can never grab the 50, 60 years that I spent with the Latin alphabet and you know, reach that same level in the Cyrillic alphabet. Now when you come to more different scripts, okay, so with Chinese or Japanese, there is this issue of the characters, and there has to be a very deliberate effort to learn the characters initially. In my case, when I started Chinese, the first 3 months we only did pinyin. And we did a lot of listening to, it's called Chinese dialogues. They spoke so quickly, I thought that the people who made that recording did it deliberately to frustrate us. Just sounded so fast. And then once we had those sounds and those pinyin words, then we started learning the characters. And within 3 months, I was reading newspapers. So let me just finish. And then and I did a lot of deliberate learning of characters, and then as I continued reading, then I would learn them while I was reading. So it was still very much a sort of input-based learning process with a very specific effort to learn the characters. Now, my last 3 languages, obviously Arabic. The Arabic script is very difficult because the shape of the letter changes depending on its position in the word. And there's not a one-to-one connection to a sound. It could be pronounced this way or that way. And then they have letters. I don't know if there's Arabic speakers here, but there are letters that you don't pronounce. They're called, I don't know, moon letters, sun letters. There's all kinds of stuff. It's still the same. And then Persian, which is easier than Arabic. And then Turkish, it's in the Latin alphabet, but there are more loan words. Like Turkish has more Western European language loan words than, say, Arabic has, but it's still essentially all new words. It's the same process. I start with my mini stories. And I might pick up a teach yourself book. Gives me an overview of the grammar, a bunch of explanations that I'll immediately forget. And if I say to myself, I have to learn this explanation, that would totally drive me away. Because there is no way I can remember the explanations of how the language works. There's no way I'm going to remember the conjugation of the verbs. And in Turkish, when they show you a conjugation table, it's like this deep. And there's no way. So I don't worry about it. I listen, I read. In the case of the mini stories, I know the story because I've done it now in Greek, I've done it in other languages. And I hear it, and I hear it, and I don't understand it, and it's noise, and then I read it, and I look up words, and I do the flashcards, and I listen again, and slowly, and I don't listen to story 1 20 times. I listen to story 1 3 times, then I go to story 2, even though I only understand 30% of story 1, I go to story 2, I go to story 3, and I cycle back, and I just keep doing that. And I've had the experience. I listen to Farsi, I listen to Arabic, I don't understand a word, I can't read the squigglies. And yet, lo and behold, 3 months later, I understand it. 60 stories, I understand 40 of them perfectly, and the other 20 that I haven't yet listened to often enough. The brain learns, and the brain learns faster if we expose it to the language through listening and reading than if you try to explain theoretically. We got, the Arabic grammar is just ridiculous. 7 types of verbs and all kinds of stuff. That's impossible to learn if you don't already know what they're talking about. Sorry, you go back there and then we'll come here. Oh, sorry. Okay, no, you're in charge. That way, that's better. Yeah.
Merhaba.
Merhaba.
Teşekkürler konuşursunuz için. Okay. Ben seninle soru var. I'm not going to worry after you talk about whether I said that correctly or
Okay.
not.
I'm not going to worry about whether I understood it either.
My question is, do you have the experience or have any commentary on learning languages through languages that are not your...
That are which?
Through learning a language through a language that is not your native language.
Aha.
If you could speak on that.
Okay. I don't mind learning a language A through language B if I speak language B very well. So I am not a fan of monolingual dictionaries. If I find a word that I don't know, I want to know what that means now. I don't want to get an explanation in the target language where there's another bunch of words that I don't know and I just keep looking them up. So in my case, sure, I could learn Chinese through Japanese. I could learn, my top 5 languages, let's say, Mandarin, Japanese, French, Spanish. I don't mind, but it's because I know those languages well. Or very similar languages like Ukrainian, Russian is fun. You can do that. Because in fact, then it becomes interesting because you see where the differences are. Portuguese, Spanish, or whatever. Now he's in charge. Yes.
So I was wondering if your goal with a language, with all language, let's say, is to be fluent or to get to a level like B2, C1.
Right.
And then you, let's say you learn a language, you get to that level. You learn another one, you get to that level. Eventually, what I'm doing is using all the languages I know every day, which is easy because it's only 3. But then if you get to more languages, how much time do you need to keep spending on those languages that you already mastered? Not like an A2 level or whatever, but you have like a okay level. How much time would you say you need to keep spending on them to keep them at a great level?
See, obviously, you can't possibly accumulate 20 languages at varying degrees of, proficiency and be able to spend time on them every day. It's not possible. It's not possible. It's like if you go to a restaurant, you can't eat everything at the restaurant, even though you would like to. You can't. You got to make choices. But I don't worry about it. I find that if I have had enough input in the language, for the longest time, I didn't do anything in Russian or Ukrainian. Then I'm going to to Ukraine. I was in Ukraine in May. So I did spend 2 weeks before going there, and I did a lot of listening in Russian and Ukrainian. I went there, I did fine. I was on television in Ukrainian and Russian. I made mistakes. But I understand exactly what they're saying. And whatever I want to say, I say it. And it comes out, with my shirt tail hanging out, and it doesn't matter. I've never worried about that. and I find that again, I feel that if you do a lot of listening and reading, and I particularly like the mini stories, and so you have them, so that's memory in your brain, but it's almost like you've parked it in an external disk drive. And when you go back to that, and it could be an audiobook or something that you've been over before that helped you get there before, and you go back to that and you do it again and it comes back pretty quickly. So I never worry about that. Yeah. Yeah.
When you started reading,
right?
For example, reading left to right, right to left,
right,
up and down, was that a challenge?
The right to left is not a challenge. The challenge is that there's no vowels. They say in the Arabic script, they have a system of vowels, but then that doesn't help you much because later on they yank that from you. So it's all, no, seriously, it's in the beginner material and in the Quran. Otherwise they don't use it. So if you go to Al Jazeera newspaper, they don't have it. So that was the difficulty. Not, right to left is not a problem. It's that the forms change. It's initially a problem, but then you get used to that. So that's not so, in language learning, there are things that are difficult at first, that you think you will never surmount this problem, and eventually those are not real problems. But the longer term problem is that in Arabic, I find that I almost have to know the word before I can pronounce it. Because of the inconsistency in the relationship between, the written, what you see, and how it's pronounced, and so forth. And so I have sympathy for people trying to read English. Yes?
To pick up on how to maintain a language, I often suggest to immigrants, since I do French conversation and English conversation for immigrants, to listen to radio. So the other way around, there's so many international radios that have programs in 6 or 7 foreign languages that you can keep listening to. Like if you take Radio Canada International, they have broadcast in several languages. If you take BBC, they have broadcast in several languages.
The problem is, and I used like Radio Romania for Romanian, and there's lots of radio stations. Very few of them provide transcripts. Echo Moskvi in Moscow, they give you transcripts. So they have 5, 10 interviews, and every day they have transcripts. Otherwise, you listen, it's frustrating. Like I can listen to Al Jazeera has great podcasts, political discussions, the election in Sudan, all kinds of stuff. But I don't understand it well enough. So it just flies by me. I pick up words here and there, and there's no transcript. So the secret is, and I've spoken to the CBC about this, they should provide transcripts. Then people can use it. If you don't have transcripts, you just have noise in the background, it's very minimally effective.
Okay, but on some TV programs, you do have specific language learning material, like TV5 has fantastic stuff.
I'm less interested in the specific language learning material. I think what is needed is to make authentic material more accessible. There's lots of learning material out there. There's no shortage of getting people started. It's that next level that's lacking very often. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm learning Russian on LingQ.
Yeah.
And I've got a tutor, and I wanted to get your view on it. We're using 3 rules. She only speaks Russian to me.
Good.
We do no grammar.
Good.
And she never corrects me.
Good. Yeah, I'm just going to mention that. There's all kinds of research. I mean, it's not that the correction is useless, but it's very limited in its usefulness. I was teaching on LingQ, I was teaching English, and I had this German learner, and he kept on saying Berlin. And I said, it's not in English. After a while, I got frustrated. I said, Berlin, in Berlin we do this. I said, well, actually in German, you say Berlin, right? Oh, yeah. Well, in English, we say Berlin. Oh, yeah, okay, thank you. He went right back to saying Berlin, right? That had zero impact on him. So, but that's just one example. But people will find their own mistakes eventually with enough. But occasionally, there are things you won't notice ever. And so sometimes it can be helpful to point them out. But you got to be very careful. I had a tweet and it had a spelling mistake in it, and some Twitter account called Grammar Police came along and Steve made a mistake. So I went back and I said, people and native speakers make mistakes. It could be like I use a lot of dictation software. It might have been that. I don't know why it came out, or I just made a careless mistake. most people will see that it's a mistake. But I said, I consider it rude to make unsolicited corrections of people. He came back, or he, she, I don't know, the website, the bot came back and again pointed out that Steve made a mistake. I never block anybody on Twitter. People call me, you old white fart. They call me all kinds of stuff. Yeah. Excuse me. What I love is the sort of feminist. Stop mansplaining, you old white fart. That was one of But I didn't block her. I don't mind. But I just think correcting people, unsolicited corrections, are a bad thing, and they're quite unnecessary, and they do discourage you, because you're having a discussion with your tutor, and you're getting enjoyment out of the fact that you're somehow able to say something. She actually understands what you're saying. You know that because she replied in a way that suggested that she understands what you're saying, and then she starts to correct your Russian. I'm against that.
Which is very like you teach small children.
Beg pardon?
When small children learn, you don't do grammar, you do
No.
similar, very similar.
And then you get people saying, well, the moms, if they didn't correct their kids, English, they'd never learn to speak. Are you kidding me? How many mistakes can the mom possibly correct? Okay, time is up. Thank you. Help yourself to a T-shirt.